Hello all, and welcome to the second of Wines of Germany's Big G trade sessions, which this year is taking, for obvious reasons, a virtual format and working in partnership with Harpers, so we're delighted to be in on this. The Big G trade sessions, they're a two-day celebration, effectively, of German wines with tasting masterclasses, a series of short kind of tours called In My Vineyard, winemaker virtual tours, we're putting up to stream tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow afternoon there's a closing debate, a wine for all reasons, as part of the mix. So quite a bit to be getting on with. This morning we had more of an off-trade focused tasting, and this afternoon, sorry, I should say I'm Andrew Catchpole, editor of Harpers, and I'm joined this afternoon by Ronan Sayburn, master sommelier and much else besides, of 67 Pall Mall. Plus a fantastic looking selection of wines, and for this diving into Generation Riesling tasting. We also have in the background Caroline Tanner and Rian Rosser of Wines from Germany, who are going to assist, I hope, Ronan and I, if we get into any technical difficulty, or with, on a more serious note, any sort of facts, figures. So before I hand over to Ronan and we dive into the tasting, I'm not going to take up too much time. It's worth, I think, a quick word on Generation Riesling and why we've chosen to feature wines from this group. So what is Generation Riesling? I'm sure most of you will have heard of Generation Riesling. They were in fact founded in summer of 2006 in the UK, when 25 young, energetic producers first came together, put on a tasting with the idea that they wanted to communicate some of the young spirit and dynamism that was, sort of rippling through Germany's sort of younger winemakers, to give German wines a face and to perhaps overturn a slightly old-fashioned view of the wines at that time. So they've come quite a long way. There are 530 plus members now. When I say members, it's a sort of affiliation of producers. I think there's no fee. I'm not sure there's an official membership. It's basically like-minded younger producers coming together as Generation Riesling. So switch the focus to the UK today, and plenty of wine drinkers, especially, I think this is really relevant for Germany, especially younger and up and coming wine drinkers are looking for premium. We know they're looking for individuality, for true value for money, not cheap, for fresher, cool climate styles, and especially for personality and stories behind their wines. And all of that pretty much aligns with what Generation Riesling is all about. Obviously, you can decide for yourself as we taste through. I think the wines are, well, I'm sure they'll impress. And another factor, of course, which I'm sure Ronan would be happy to discuss, is that German wines have a real propensity, I think it's fair to generalize, to sit with a medley of dishes. Actually, they tend to be quite flexible. But I'll ask Ronan what he thinks about that as we perhaps go through on a couple of the wines. Sure. So I said I'd try and be quick, so I'm speaking quickly to give Ronan the floor as quickly as possible. A couple of housekeeping points. We'd love this to be interactive, and we will be answering questions and airing your comments as we go along. Do use the Q&A. I'll also keep my eye on the chat. So let's get everyone involved. On a sort of slightly more somber note as well, I wanted to mention the R region, where, as you'll be aware, you'll have seen the media images and so on of the terrible recent flooding that's impacted so many there. And I believe Rian from Wines of Germany from FIPS is going to be putting up some details on the chat as to how you can donate, if you wish to do so, to help out disaster hit producers. And really this morning we looked at some terrible images of trash cellars and the rest of it. So people have been, I know people have been rallying around that, which is very heartening. It's kind of what our trade's about. So back on a lighter note, going to hand over to Ronan. Ronan, great that you could join us. Fantastic. And I'm looking forward to tasting with you. Quick question from me though.
Yeah.
What can you do? I don't know if you can do this in brief. What is it about Germany and German wines that floats your Venice boat? Is that something you need an hour session just to talk about?
God, yeah,
can you give us a brief?
Yeah, probably. I mean, wow, God, that's a long question. I mean, I've loved German wines forever. I mean, well, if you're a sommelier and you come to Pall Mall for an interview, before you get the job, usually the first thing is, do you love German Riesling? And if it's a no, then you're not probably going to get the job. It's a bit like, I always think, it's like, what's that phrase about never trust a skinny chef? It's that sort of thing. Never trust a sommelier who doesn't love German Riesling. And I often talk to people about, their sort of Vinous journey, to our members and to students, and when they go through their Vinous journey, and you start off drinking, probably sweet cider and Coca-Cola and things like that. Your first alcoholic drink, sweet cider, and then you move on to, beers, and then maybe Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, and you get a bit more sophisticated. You end up going into Burgundies and Bordeaux's and things like that, and then probably as you're getting to the end, you're taking those, Nebbiolos and those big Brunello and Montalcinos and things like that. You probably in your 30s and your 40s then maybe, and you've got a bit of disposable income and you can afford the wines. And then they say, I'm kind of done. I've drunk everything now. I know what I like, and this is what I like. What do you recommend? And I say, try a German Riesling. And they say, oh no, I used to drink that when I was like 17 going to a party, which is not the proper German Riesling. That's probably cheap Müller-Thurgau from Liebfraumilch or something. But I do think that to understand German Riesling, you got to understand flavor, and you've definitely got to understand balance, especially when it comes to that off-dry style. You've got to understand that ripeness and sweetness of fruit is something which matches really well with the vicious acidity that you can get in Riesling. And when you get that right, it's literally like walking a knife edge between too sweet and too acidic. And I think when they do it well in Germany, there's nothing great. Great German Riesling for me is like the ballerina of the wine world. It's kind of like incredibly muscular and taut underneath with that really tense acid, but then on top it's very elegant and very fine and very beautiful. So I think it's what really I like about German Riesling is the balance. Even Trocken German Riesling, the minimum Trocken is 9 grams per liter residual sugar. So if you say to anyone else, a dry wine is 9 grams per liter residual sugar, they'll say, no, it's not. But you kind of need that little bit of sweetness just to calm down those angular edges that you can get with Riesling in a northern climate. So yeah, I think German Riesling is all about balance. And you, Andrew, what rocks your boat about Riesling? What was your first Riesling encounter?
Well, while you had wonderful images, ballerina images and so on, sort of power and grace, I sometimes have the image of fencing in my mind, and you've got that sort of somehow that sort of thread of kind of acidity that holds it all together, but the whole is a kind of almost like an elegant dance again. Yes, exactly. So with precision as well. Yeah. But I think very early on in my career, I've had a long association with Harpers Wine and Spirit. I was a staff writer way back when, and everyone had jumped on all the annual supplements we do, focusing on different countries. No one really sort of had taken enough interest in Germany. People wanted to jump on planes to California and to South Africa and to Australia and all these long haul destinations. And so I got thrown in at the deep end and sent to Germany to pick up the Harpers German supplements. So there in my sort of early mid-20s, I was suddenly thrust in front of and into the cellars of, literally the greats on the German wine scene, and absolutely blown away with the wines that I discovered. I mean, it was a real baptism of just greatness, actually. It was so that was my first real moment in Germany, and it was just such an eye-opener. I was blown away actually by the quality of the wines, by the style, and just love Riesling. I mean, obviously there's much more besides, and we're going to look at other examples today because we're moving through where are we going? We're starting Weissburgunder, Graubagunda, then Riesling, and we've got Spätburgunder / Pinot Noir as well. So, but it was an immersion in and the Mosel to begin with, actually, that really just hooked me. So
yeah, and I think the longevity of the wines as well. If you go to Germany and you go to a winemaker's cellar and they bring something directly from the cellar and give it to you blind, you might be, oh, this is quite old. This is probably from, this is from the early 80s, and it's actually from the late 40s or something like that. They do last forever. They are pretty amazing wines. But we're not just going to talk about aging. Yeah.
Nope. Yep.
So so we've got a bit of a mix. So we've got Weissburgunder, we've got a Graubagunda, then two Pinots, a Spätburgunder and a Pinot. Funnily enough, one is labelled as Pinot Noir, the other's a Spätburgunder, and then a sweet classic Riesling to finish with. But just talking about Germany in general. So Germany is 102 hectares in size. If you think all of Bordeaux is 110, 111 hectares, so it's not particularly huge, Germany. They have about 20, in the world, what's grown in the world of Riesling is about 42,000 hectares of Riesling globally, and about 21,000 hectares of that is in Germany. So Germany actually has half of the entire Riesling planted in the world. Following that is after Riesling, we have Müller-Thurgau, and then after that, Weissburgunder, Graubagunda, which is about 7,000 hectares, and then Weissburgunder about 6,000 hectares. So not very much. And the first wine that we're going to start with is it's actually from the Rheingau. It's from a producer called Tony Jost. So if people have that one, if you want to pour that one, so Tony Jost, he's really kind of based up in the Middle Rhine. So if you go down to the end of the Rheingau and kind of turn around the corner, the Rheingau is a river that it goes all the way through Alsace, goes north, and then it goes through the Pfalz, goes through the Rheinhessen, and then it gets to the top of the Rheinhessen by the town of Mainz. And then essentially the river hits huge mountain known as the Taunus Mountain. It's a very hard granite mountain. And then again, it gets diverted from its north-south journey, gets diverted east-west for a number of kilometers. And then as it gets around the hardest parts of the Taunus Mountain, it redirects north again. And that's where you get into the Mittel Rhine. And so this producer is actually based in the Mittel Rhine. He's based in a town called Bacharach, which is just in that first part of the Mittel Rhine. If you just go around the corner from kind of Assmannshausen, kind of around from there, this is where Tony Jost is located. But he's got 15 hectares and 2/3 of it is in the Mittel Rhine, but then he has a small amount, 5 hectares, just less than 5 hectares. I think it's 3.5 hectares over in the Rheingau. And it's the far end of the Rhine, so the far eastern end of the Rheingau. So it is, it's around very close to Eltville. It's very close to Erden. It's very close to Eltville, sorry, and not far from Kiedrich. So it's just out of Mainz, really, on that eastern part of the Rheingau. And there's not an awful lot of Weissburgunder or Pinot Blanc planted up there at all. So I thought that this would be a very interesting thing to try. Pinot Blanc, I guess, was more, it's more closer to Chardonnay than anything else. And I guess where you're going to see more of Pinot Blanc is obviously Alsace. But it has similarities to Riesling. For me, it has that kind of that red apple, that sort of rounded floral characteristic. It tends to feel a bit more dense than Riesling, but probably not as intense. So Riesling can have that tension to it on the nose, that almost electricity. This is feeling a lot more kind of white burgundy in a way. I'm not sure if he's putting some oak in it. It smells like there might be a very small amount of new oak in it. But this is less than 3 grams per litre residual sugar, but it has a lot of weight to it, has a lot of texture to it. I think it's difficult to buy this wine, to be honest. It's up to 13% alcohol. He is a member of the VDP. But it's difficult to get this wine. I know you can get it through the Wine Society, but I'm not sure if he actually sells it to the trade. I think it's only can be bought through the Wine Society.
Ronan, do we know what sort of price this might be?
I don't, I'm afraid. Maybe the ladies at Wines of Germany can tell us. But I think it's a rich wine. You can get that kind of red apple sweetness, I think, on the palate. You get a lot of white floral characteristics. You certainly get a minerality to it. If we can we use that word nowadays, Andrew? Are we allowed to use minerality, or is that a no-no? It's like masculine and feminine.
I'm all for it. Our first wine this morning was called Pure Mineral, and I came out for it. So
okay,
yes, I think we all understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but you get that minerality, and I think it's just got an incredible length. I mean, even after tasting it, that kind of red apple sweetness, that brightness, just sort of sits there on the palate. Yeah,
I like the. Sorry, I was going to say the breadth and length on this, and there's some beautiful fruit in there. I'm getting sort of soft, droopy style fruit. Fresh, acidity's good. I mean, totally different shape from Riesling. I get what you're saying about little hints, though. Maybe that's more of a sort of Germanic thing going on there.
Yeah.
But where would you place this with a customer? What would you say? How would you encourage them? Would you say it's not Chardonnay? It's got a little bit of a leaning somewhere else, and it's
yeah.
How do you?
I mean, I think if people want to try something different and they want to try something that they know is going to be good, I mean, just by the fact that it comes from the Rheingau, you know, really one of Germany's most premium wine regions, you can guess it's going to be pretty good. You know, why you would be making Weissburgunder in the Rheingau instead of Riesling, unless it's going to be good, you just wouldn't do it. You would change it over for Riesling. So that's pretty much a guarantee that it's going to be great, you know, just coming from that area and that producer. So I think it's a really interesting wine to do by the glass, even though it's done in such small quantities. But it just has this crisp, clean, you know, very fruity minerality and attack on the palate, and then just this roundness and just this great length to it. So, you know, if you know, a lot of the Rhine regions, you know, you'll be drinking fresh river fish, so things like trout, things like pike. Yeah, this would go really well if you had something, some kind of, even like a beurre blanc flavored with orange, something like that. A beurre blanc flavored with a few drops of orange juice with some grilled river trout or some poached river trout. I think this would be just fantastic.
Yeah, I can see that. And we've Amanda Barnes. Hi, Amanda, out there.
Hi, Amanda.
The acidity of this, which keeps quite a broad wine in shape, lovely texture, and definitely one I'd love by the glass. So there you go, Snap. So
yeah,
I mean, any thoughts as well from tasters, audience out there as to any pairings as we go along, things like that, or on a more businessy side, you know, where and how you might sell any of these wines, but definitely one by the glass. I think that's superb. It's looking really good.
Well, I think kind of 95% of everything that's grown in the Rheingau is either Riesling or Spätburgunder. So there's only a tiny bit of none of those varieties. So like I say, I think that if you can find something that's not Riesling or Spätburgunder from the Rheingau, it's a real oddity, and yeah, and a talking point. And working as a sommelier, that's what you want. If you've got a story about a wine, I think that it's half sold already. And especially if you've got someone who's a lover of German wines, you know, to have a Spätburgunder from the Rheingau. Yeah, it's pretty unique. Not a Spätburgunder, Weissburgunder.
Weissburgunder, yeah. And just to say to all that we're looking at getting the RRPs up, and forgive us for not starting with them, but apparently this 12, Chris White saying 12.50 on the Wine Society. It's a great value.
It is great value. I'm going to write that down. I might buy some of that. It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. Excellent.
Yeah. So this is in the town of Wolof.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the Wolof Valkenburg vineyard. Yeah. But I'm getting some of that, yeah, orchard fruit, that kind of that. Apart from the yellow and red apple, that's sort of slightly. You can imagine it going very much in the sort of quince sort of style. You could almost imagine maybe confusing it a bit for Chenin Blanc in another 5 or 10 years.
Definitely getting those sort of soft orchard fruits, those sort of slightly riper fruits. Do you know if this this vineyard is it planted solely to Weissburgunder?
I don't think so. No, it's
Weissburgunder with Riesling and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a Grosses Gewachs vineyard, so it's considered a Grand Cru site, but I would imagine most of it is Riesling, and I would imagine that what he's got is, I can't find what the actual plantings of Weissburgunder he's got, but I imagine it would probably be a few rows, but you know, at the very most. So yeah, so a real oddity. And you know, I think Wine Society does a great job of picking up little batches of stuff, and they're not there forever. They may be there for a couple of weeks, and once it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, if it's being sold by the Wine Society, snap it up now. Okay, so a good start, I think. I hope.
Okay. Right, quick. Rosemary Brown. Hi. Who's asking? She's asking how much Weissburgunder is grown in the Rheingau. But I think you might have said earlier, Ronan, that it's very little.
Yeah, I did work it out that if so, 80% is Riesling, 15% is Spätburgunder, 5% is everything else. There are 3,500 hectares grown in the Rheingau, so 5% of 3,500. It comes out as something like 0.175 hectares, something like that, most likely. So it's probably, you know, it's a few hectares, not very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't find exact figures for Weissburgunder there.
Yeah. It's very, very small, basically. I think that would be negligible, scientifically speaking, statistically, wouldn't it? So
I would think so.
But obviously not negligible when you look at the quality that's coming out. Let's put it that way. So very
It's
special.
definitely an oddity.
What a great place to
And so if we want to move on to wine,
so what have you?
Sorry. Yeah, if you want
no,
to
far away. I was going to say, what will be next?
So wine number 2. So this is Graubagunda, like I said, the 3rd most planted variety in Germany of the white varieties, after Riesling and Müller-Thurgau. So this is going to a totally different area. So this is, well, not too far away, actually. Oh, yes, we are. This is going right down to the sort of southern end. So this is kind of 50 miles from the French border. So if you go right down into the Pfalz, you're not far away from Alsace here. So it's quite close to Stuttgart. So it's right down there. Yeah, so down in the Pfalz, they're planting a lot of different regions, different varieties. You're going much further south. It's getting a lot warmer. You're getting a lot more tropical kind of characteristic. Rian's saying 5.4% German vineyards planted with Weißburgunder. Yeah, that's about right. I think it's 5,500 hectares are planted. But yeah, getting down to the Pfalz, it's getting warmer. It's getting more tropical. I think you're starting to feel that in the wines. You're getting close to Alsace here, so it's going to be interesting to see, how close this is to an Alsace style. I know that this is a Trocken, whereas most Alsace does have residual sugar in it. But I think it's got real weight to it. I don't think the acidity's out of balance at all. I think the acid and the sugar and the roundness, and again, you're getting that sort of that apple characteristic and a lot of that minerality. This is grown on, this is called a great word in Germany is Muschelkalk. So it's grown on that very, very high fossil content limestone. So very similar to something like, very similar to the soils in Chablis. So lots and lots of soils, lots and lots of fossils in there, and really thick limestone. And I think that minerality, that wet, chalky minerality, comes through in the wine.
I think it's really dominant for me right through on the long finish, and it's leaving my tongue almost slightly electric, kind of very enervating. Yeah.
And it's got that, sometimes you get on the back of the palate with Pinot Gris, you get that slight kind of melon, almost banana-y, sort of unripe banana kind of characteristic. I always found in very oaky, very rich styles of white Rioja, you get that bruised brown banana characteristic, but with Pinot Gris, I find that slightly underripe, greenish banana kind of character. But this family, yeah, can you get something like that?
Yes, I can. It's some site of a label thing.
Yeah, and for a 2020, it's obviously very, very young. This comes from Boutonneau. And again, I'm not sure of the price, but I know Boutonneau are very, very good at doing great value wines. 2020, and it's a young wine, but it's still got a lot of flavor packed into it. It does kind of feel almost a kind of a limey acidity, like a green citrus kind of characteristic from the acid. Yeah. And there are a few.
How do you think this is likely to develop over the next couple of years? And what do you think about optimum drinking time with this Graubagunda?
I think this is drinking lovely now, but I think it will just get better with age. It will start to get a lot softer. And those fruits will start to go a lot more kind of tertiary, and you'll start getting a lot more honeysuckle, chamomile, that sort of characteristic coming out. So the 19 is 17, 18 pounds. It's a little bit more expensive than the last one, but still a great wine. I think this would be really good with things like white meat, white flesh, something maybe a bit more on the sort of richer kind of seafood. So things like monkfish. If you had monkfish, that sort of thing, I think it would go really well with pork. A pork with apple dish, I think it would be good with. You could happily serve that with a roasted pork with an apple sauce, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's where that's what I'm thinking of at the moment, actually. Having been eating pork last night, actually, this wine would have been a really welcome accompaniment. It's quite a flexible beast as well. And I think, is it fair to say, Ronan, that Graubagunda tends to have that sort of flexibility across, a sort of range of foodstuffs. It's quite capable of taking a lot in its stride. A good example like this, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Anything from very very saline oysters, and especially oysters when they're at that creamy season, when they start getting that real creamy characteristic to, or where they're coming from in the world, that sort of creaminess, that saline character. I think it would go well with that. I think it would work quite well with smoked food, so things like smoked salmon, it would go well with. I think it's just got a lot of weight and a lot of complexity to it.
And Rosemary Brown's asked comments on 2020 vintage ? And I hope Rosemary. Wines Germany. Rianne's come back saying weather means similar pattern to the last 2 years. I'm afraid I'm not entirely up to speed with 2020, the intricacies of it. Ronan, can you?
Yeah, well,
can you add any more about?
I think really, Germany's had a whole string of really good vintages, maybe apart from the 2014, which was a difficult vintage. 2015 was maybe the best vintage, but I think every other vintage in the last 10 years and longer has been pretty successful. So it's kind of like, I guess if you're scoring it, it would be a 3 or a 4 on a five-star kind of scale. And I think that this kind of brings me to a point that I wanted to discuss at some point, but just the fact that, Germany, historically, when I did all my WSET and everything, really, we were all told, in Germany, sugar is king. You're that far north that it's difficult to get ripeness in grapes. So really what you're looking for is sugar. And for a long time in Germany, when you're using the Predikat scale, the most expensive wines are the ones with a lot of sugar in them. But now it's fairly easy to achieve Auslese in most years. It's not really a rare thing like it was 30, 40 years ago. So if you've seen the latest changes to German wine law, and I think everyone kind of struggles a little bit with German wine law. It's not easy to understand. German bottling can be difficult to understand with its long words and its long terminology. Definitely rewards a little bit of study to it. But the latest laws that are coming out, that came out last year in 2020, are really trying to move German quality definitely towards that terroir-based and also Trocken-based styles of wine. So they kind of come up with the 3 different pyramids. And the top of the pyramid is really kind of focusing the very, very top and the most expensive wines are adopting a bit of a VDP kind of strategy, as in looking for specific sites. So looking for those Grand Cru sites, those Erstelager, Erstgewachs sites, and looking, at a Trocken style coming from those. So I think that that's a really interesting move from Germany, to kind of be moving away from the traditional Predikat kind of style. And I think probably less than 10% now, maybe less than 5%, is labeled with those Predikats and those slightly off-dry, sweeter styles that I think we all love. But the quality of Trocken German Riesling now is just so fantastic. As you can see, both of these Trocken wines, they have so much flavor to them. So it's going to be interesting to try the next wine, the Riesling, and see how that's going to match up to those. But yeah, I think it's a good move on behalf of Germany to go that route. Yeah. That obviously the VDP have been doing that for a long time, and it's been successful. It's an easy way for consumers to understand the wines a little bit more. So it's going to be interesting to see that transition over the next 5 or 6 years.
It's a really good move, and we've got you can read about it briefly at Harpers news feed, or for more information, if you go onto the link that's on the chat now, and that'll give you the real lowdown on what's going on. But I think, as we said earlier, Ronan, when we were chatting, that it's the fact that it's nationwide rather than kind of little regions doing their little things and different things going on. So that sort of slight simplification. But my quick question for you would be, relationship between expression of terroir and dryness or otherwise in the wine. Do you think there was any sense in the past that terroir was masked, could be masked by the higher sugar styles of wine, or not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the higher sugar levels, sugar can kind of hide, a myriad of different things. But once you bring the sugar levels down and making it more Trocken, and especially with Riesling, Riesling as a variety is something that, and you can see it really well in Germany, you see it really well in Alsace, but it's something that really expresses where it comes from. with minimum winemaking intervention. You don't mess around with Riesling. You can fiddle around with Chardonnay and you can barrel age it and put it on its lees and do batonnage and do malolactic for it. But with Riesling, it's really got to talk about where it comes from. So it's climate and soil, I think, that are the most important things. So I think that sometimes in the past, maybe really good terroir could have been a little bit masked by the sugary styles. And it'd be a shame to lose those styles with more residual sugar to them. But I think, the Trocken styles, as long as they're balanced, sometimes you do see winemaking regions that will, and not just in Germany, but all over the world, that will take Trocken wines too far and do 0 grams per litre sugar to them. And so they just become acid bombs. And I think if you start doing that with Riesling, you're going to be having dental problems probably quite quickly. So I think that you've got to have some sugar in there, as long as, like we said before, it's balanced. And if you're going from the more weightier regions, the regions like the Rheinhessen and the Pfalz and the Rheingau, all of those regions for me have that very kind of that orange characteristic to the citrus. So rather than being yellow citrus, rather than being lemony, I find the Mosel is a bit more on that green lime citrus. But the three down the Rhine have that big, rich, full-bodied orange peach kind of characteristic to them. And the acid needs to be there and the sugar needs to be there and just working together in harmony, even in Trocken wines.
Yeah. Excellent.
So,
cool. Well,
so hopefully people like that. Pinot Gris can often, be softer in acidity, but I think that that's got a really good, very firm, very crisp style of acidity that's working really well. So time's moving on. So if we go on to wine number 3. So wine number 3, we're to a classic Riesling. So this is the Toefl's Pad Riesling. So Toefl's Pad, I think it means the devil's path. I don't know what the vineyard's like, but this is in Eisenheim. So this is back in the Rheinhessen. So if you're right back into the top of the Rheinhessen, you're not that far from the Rheingau. If you cross over the Rheingau, come from the Rheingau, cross over the Rhine River, you're into the top of the Rheingau. And you have Mainz to one side, and this is not that far from Mainz. This is in the town of Essenheim. So very southwest of Mainz. Yeah, it's quite close to Nachenheim. So 2017, like we say, most of the vintage have been pretty successful, and the 17, you can see, I think, in the color of this wine, you can see that it's already starting to get quite golden in color. So it's already starting. This is 25.95 from Lane Sanderman. But yeah, you're getting that. You're getting another layer of complexity, I think. This is what you would hope to find in top quality Riesling. You're starting to get that chamomile, that honeyed, that acacia flower, that honeysuckle, along with that peachy character, that orange mandarin skin. I think you could even dare to say there's a touch of petrol sneaking in there as well.
I really get the mandarin, and you say the sort of honeysuckle side of it, and it's just, for me, on the cusp, it's still like really nice, racy, uplifting acidity, but it's just beginning to sort of develop in lots of different directions, sort of extra layers of complexity, and it's quite a nice sort of on the balance between, I suppose, youth and something just a little bit kind of young adulthood or something. Would you suggest this is quite a ways to go? I mean, it certainly still tastes like a very youthful contender to me.
Oh yeah, I think so. But again, the nose for me tends to, like I was talking about earlier, that ballerina kind of style. It is delicate, but it's also very powerful. So it's got some richness and some complexity on the nose, but it's delicate. But it feels like it's going to be a big wine. And the winemaker here, Stefan, he does tend to make wines with a lot of power and a lot of precision to them, and I think you can get that, that big. It's like a good white Burgundy. You get that sort of tadpole effect, that huge kind of rush of very, very complex, rich, lots and lots of layers of fruit. It's almost kind of like fruit compote going on there. Again, the sort of quince paste, lots and lots of orchard fruits together, and then it tails off into that very, very long tail, that tadpole kind of tail of minerality and acidity.
Got any thoughts from the tasters out there? Anything to add to that? Any comments? Do you like it? Is it worth 25 squid? I would say so. Absolutely.
So, yeah. And I think it's got an incredible length, incredible amount of time. Potentially, it could sit in the cellar. I think that would be drinking well in 30 years.
Yeah. So yeah, Amanda, again, great length, precision. Love that wine. Agree it's on a tipping point. Would love to try it in a few more years too. I mean, that's the thing. You need to buy half a case, don't you? Case so that you can every year or two you can just chart the progress of these wines. So, I mean, it's so wonderful to
and I think that if you were doing that if you were to take a traditional, like a lobster bisque, where you get all the lobster shells and you really roast them up, you get them really blackened and charred, and put some cognac in there, flame that, make that into a lovely stock and make it into a bisque, and do that kind of smoky, rich shellfish bisque. I think that sort of wine would be fantastic with that.
Yeah, just beginning to get mouth-watering. I skipped lunch, which was a real disaster for a tasting of wines that is nice, stimulating. So we've a few more comments. I mean, Rosemary Brown, lovely wine, definitely worth the money, still tasting young. And Amanda agreeing she's incredibly hungry now, but that's part of the point. Perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about food in Germany in the round in a sec. But anyone out there, any favorites so far or surprises? I never know what people come along thinking. So I'm guilty of this to a degree. I come along thinking, fantastic, I'm Germany, I think Riesling, and I think some Spätburgunder, and that's it. I mean, two great varieties. But what are the Weissburgunder and the Graubagunda? I mean, are they up there with if you like, the flagship white? It's gosh, I'm so keen to get back into a room where we can just, Ronan, just call out to the audience in front of us and get some sort of real time of having people close the day. Anyway, while people are having a thought about that,
Rosemary's asking about Rosemary's asking about the Rose is asking about the producer. So I think the original father of the family, or the great grandfather, was Francois Brainvillet from France, and he fled France during the Huguenots' persecution to settle in Eisenheim, so just close to Mainz. And it took really to the 1960s. For them to start bottling on their own. Before that, they were selling to a local cooperative, and now it's the great grandson of Francois who is the winemaker. So Stefan, who's making that. I think the Weissburgunder are great for food. People seem to like the Weissburgunder. I think that the Weissburgunder and the Graubagunda were both great, but when you get to the Riesling, it's another step up, and you can kind of say, wow, that sort of dry, trocken, well-made, tense style of Riesling, is another level. Derek likes the Graubagunda so far. Great value for money, absolutely. And the Riesling is amazing, obviously. It's a good wine. I do find biting into tasting that, it's just like, it is that, has that mandarin orange kind of characteristic, and that peach, warm peach kind of acidity on the back of the palate. Well, should we move on to the first red? We have two reds to try. I think that's a pretty amazing Riesling. It would definitely benefit for a few more years in the cellar. But moving on to the first Riesling, so we've got two. The first one is the Weingut Walldorf. So this is in the southern part of the Wonnegau. So in the northern Rheinhessen. So not too far away from the previous producer. So if you're in that northern part of the Rheinhessen, not far from Mainz. If you're heading kind of towards the east, you'll be hitting the Rhine River. If you're heading towards the west, you'll be hitting sort of Bad Kreuznach and the Ahr River. So it's kind of in between the two of those. This was founded by the Walldorf brothers in 1896 down in Solheim in the Rheinhessen. Max Dexheimer is the fifth generation of winemaker, and he's running the family business. If you see the label of this is quite an unusual label. It's a very modern expression of German wine. So I think that, and Max did spend some time, this is £30.50. Max did spend some time in New Zealand. So he's kind of traveled around a little bit. I think if you go in his cellar, apparently there's the father's stainless steel tanks are on one side, and Max's brand new Burgundian oak barrels are on the other side. So I think he is trying to make his equivalent of a Burgundy. And when you're talking about, Spätburgunder or Pinot Noir coming from Germany, Germany is what would it be? I think it's the third biggest producer of Pinot Noir in the world. The first being France, really because of Burgundy and Champagne. The second, the USA, and then the third, Germany. And and how much does Germany? I think Germany makes. How much does Germany? Yeah, Germany makes 11,500 hectares of Pinot Noir. So he is making that. Again, I can get sort of an orangey character in this wine as well. But I can definitely smell the oak in it. I can smell that sort of bacon fat, that cherry characteristic. This is often described, he often describes this wine as his Black Forest Gâteau. So with the chocolatey and the cherry, the black chocolate and the sort of sweet, ripe Kirsch cherries. Again, it's a 17, but you can see it's kind of just starting to lose some of that sort of youthful puppy fat, and it's just starting to sort of open up and really blossom now. You get a lot of that red gardenia flowers. And it's starting to get some of that earthiness as well. It's almost tasting like it's got a bit of American oak to it. I'm sure it hasn't, but it does taste, it's got a bit of that whiskey lactone kind of characteristic. But what do you think, Andrew? Do you think that oak's too heavy? Do you like that style of wine? Very modern.
No, I quite like it actually. I mean, this goes through a range of different sort of aroma and flavor spectrums, from starting off with sort of like bittersweet cherry through to, yeah, as you say, kind of more forest floor, sort of earthy hints of spice on the finish. That's tied into what I think is that there's a little bit of sort of sinewiness about the oak, but it's quite fine and well integrated to me as well. It just gives it just a tiny bit more grip, which I think holds the whole thing together. So yeah, it's delicious wine. It's really, again, it's working on my my appetite, my juices as well. So it's doing it. Yeah.
So all these wines, this Pinot is destemmed before it's crushed, so there's no whole bunch fermentation to it. It is quite far north. I mean, you have the Ahr Valley off to the west of this, which has its own special microclimate, which is very good for making Pinot Noir. But this is in the Rhine-Hessen, and it's in one of the warmest parts of the Rhine-Hessen as well. But yeah, so it's destemmed and then crushed. It does a short fermentation. It's kind of Burgundian method, so it's open top fermenters with hand pigeage twice a day, and then it goes into old oak French barrels, a little bit of new French, but mainly old oak for about 28 months. So it spends a long time in oak. And it's a biodynamic wine, and then it gets bottled without any filtration and also zero sulfur, I believe.
And you said, presume that's part we haven't got sight of label here, Ronan, but the fact that this is Pinot Noir rather than labeled Spätburgunder is just very much. I mean, what do you think is being conveyed by that? I mean, how is it very much the Burgundian thing?
Well, I think it's probably Max's time spent in New Zealand. It's probably, when you look at the label, you can see that it's quite a move away from a traditional German label. So I think it's just bringing in his rather than he wants to make it an international style of wine that people recognize, and they'll recognize it by the words Pinot Noir more than by Spätburgunder.
Yeah, and there's a link in chat now, so I just had a look at the label, which I now spot. Yes, exactly, and that's looking fantastic. And yet, to me, there's still an imprint very much of where this wine is from. The fact that its home in Germany is still written over this wine. So it's not as if it's been subsumed into an international style, has it? I think it's fair to say.
No, not at all. I mean, I think it's very, very high quality Pinot Noir that's going to sit very comfortably next to, good Pinots from New Zealand and good Pinots from California. And it's a great testament to high quality Pinot being made in Germany now.
So a fun comment from Atish Prasad, who's saying, much of German Pinot is drunk domestically, I understand, so it must be good. Well, I mean, I think Germans are quite appraised of quality, like many of the rest of us. So that's kind of true. But it leads me to if I could just add to your question, Atish, that Ronan, during your time of looking at Germany and its wines,
Yeah.
would you say there's been a big evolution in terms of style with German Pinots? And why is it more recently? I guess the obvious answer is because Burgundy's so damned expensive.
Yeah.
But are there other reasons, I think possibly stylistic reasons, why it's becoming more known? What thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I guess that, that traditionally, you were really only finding Pinots down in Baden. A little bit of global warming has kind of made it a bit more accessible to grow in other places. But it's still relative. It's a cool climate variety, and Germany's still not a hot place. So it just becomes the ideal place to grow Pinot Noir. Because you're getting relatively cool nights and you're getting relatively cool days, and summers are not too hot, and you can grow very, very good Pinot Noir successfully there. Yeah, Rose says interesting Pinot, but not typical of German Pinot Noir. I would probably agree. It's not typical of German Pinot Noir, but it's it's part of the philosophy of Generation Riesling. It's kind of trying to do something a little bit different. It's bringing an international style of wine to the country. It would probably be hard to spot that. Be easy to spot it as Pinot Noir. Maybe be hard to place it in Germany. Yeah, but it's a good wine.
I could see links to stylistically to I'm thinking perhaps Marlborough, places like this, so you can see the connection there. I think with it's quite sort of there's quite a lot of sort of good primary bright fruit that's up front. It's drinking.
Yeah, I might probably comment that I think that it does need some time for that oak to integrate a little bit more. I do find that oaks may be a little bit over the top for me. I do like maybe a bit more subtle oak to it, but I think as an international, I think if you're used to drinking Pinot Noir from around the world, I think you'd be very happy with it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Quick. I think we're good on time, so it's all good.
Well, should we carry on to the next Pinot? So I think that this one you're going to find is a lot more traditional in style. So the next Pinot Noir is coming from a very different region. So this is kind of absolutely about as far south as you can get in Germany. So if you go right down to the bottom of Germany, to the bottom of Baden, you're really on the kind of the corner of the three countries. So you're very close to Basel in France, so in Alsace. So it's very close to Basel, and it's in Germany, and it's on the Swiss border. So it actually borders both Switzerland and France. It's right down there in the very, very far south. So it's based in the town of Wil, and it's the Schneider family that have been making wine down there, or have owned that estate down there since 1425. And they've probably had quite an interesting time, because where it is it sits in what we call the Belfort Gap. So the Belfort Gap is kind of the big gap that sits between the Vosges Mountains and the top of the Jura Mountains. So anyone coming over from Eastern Europe and coming over towards France, they will go through the Belfort Gap rather than going over the mountains. So it's kind of had there's been a lot of invasions going through the Belfort Gap for a long, long time, starting with Julius Caesar, and most recently probably during the Second World War. So it's seen a lot of activity down there. So if you've been around there since 1425, you've probably had an interesting time over the last few centuries. Yeah, but 1425 they started it, and then the Schneider family that are down there now. So it's 12 hectares of vines, but it's, like I say, it's quite far south. So, and the further south that you're getting, obviously it's getting warmer. I think just simply by looking at the color of this wine, you can see it's quite pale in color. I think it does go through some whole bunch. There's partial whole bunch in it. But there is quite a lot of stems going into it as well. That sort of looks like that because of the color of the wine, and also the slightly herbaceous character that I'm getting. Yeah, so this is the Weiler on the Rhine. So I think that maybe Rose would agree that this is more typical German Pinot Noir. It's lighter, less oaky, more ethereal, maybe more on that sort of Côte de Beaune style than the international style. So
Yeah,
what's
so
on that?
Rose is saying, yeah, agreeing, delicate, elegant, more typical, and asking why you didn't put this first in the lineup. It was an interesting question because this is more elegant, more integrated, more rounded, perhaps a slightly subtler style of Pinot, possibly.
Yeah, I thought that this would be the better Pinot because it was, you know, traditionally in Baden where you can get some of the better Pinots. So yeah, more typical, more elegant. I didn't really think that Max's wines was going to be that punchy, as punchy as it was.
Sure. Well, you
As
can
it
never be
was,
absolutely sure, can you? Interesting. Something I'm interested to know about, and which Rian's raised, was a possible tip to me, Ronan, on a question, and it's about selling and pairing German Pinots. So how would you sort of advise, you know, a budding sommelier or restaurateur to turn people who may or may not be, say, Burgundy lovers? I mean, okay, if they're so some people will be up to speed that you can get some fantastic, I mean, true value Pinot out of Germany at the moment because the prices are still relatively good.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you sell these wines on, basically?
Well, I think you know, people now are looking for, you know, wines that are less high in alcohol, that are, you know, less oak to them, that have more purity of fruit. So they're going, you know, definitely towards that you know, Beaujolais seen a massive renaissance, you know, over the last 10, 15 years because of that. You know, Californian Pinot Noir. So I think people are looking for pure, lighter red wines with less alcohol and less oak. So, you know, someone who's maybe not a particular Pinot lover, as a sommelier, you could definitely get them interested in Spätburgunder. And once they like it and they love it, then you can say, well, it's pretty much the same as Pinot Noir from Burgundy. And you know, and if they love Burgundy, where you are here, you know, it's not that far. You know, you're literally going through the gap above the Savoie, and then, I mean, this Belfort Gap is also known as the gateway into Burgundy. So historically, that's how you get, you know, the Dukes of Burgundy, and that's where they travel from East and West Europe through this gap. So it's known as the gateway into Burgundy. So I think that if you like Burgundy, or if you just like pure wines with delicacy, it's an easy sell. But saying that as well, you know, I mean, I've always
that's it. So
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, do finish off, but I just come back to that. So wines of purity and delicacy, are we suggesting then slightly more so than with Burgundy sometimes, or with comparable wines? So what's the point of difference? I guess that is it possible to say across Germany's regions? I think another interesting point there is that the soils are obviously a lot less homogeneous than they are across great patches of Burgundy, aren't they? How does that impact on the style and the variety?
Well, I think, yeah, you're just talking about a totally different type of soil, really. You know, Burgundy is going to be, you know, classic for its in the northern part of Burgundy for that kind of the rich red marl, and then down in the southern part on the limestones. So yeah, you're just sort of a different style, really, and also a different price. I don't know if we found out that price. Oh yeah, the price was 27.50. So that would be the price of, you know, probably now a relatively good Bourgogne village, whereas this is a single vineyard site. So you're talking a lot more terroir driven rather than being a bit more generic blending for the same price. So yeah.
Yeah, no, two very different wines. I very much like both the wines, actually. I think there's such different expressions.
And food wise, you know, things like, you know, game, partridge, something like that. Guinea fowl, I think, would work really well with it. You know, obviously duck breast with cherries, you know, very, very classic. You know, even duck confit with lentils and bacon, that sort of thing, you know, would be great with those styles of wine, I think.
Yeah, so rich, and obviously the ability to cut through sort of quite fatty sort of game as well, and duck, perhaps goose, you know, etc. So, I also think sometimes it's just worth looking at quite simple things. I mean, just a really good plate of great quality, you know, sausages, dare I say, or something. I mean, I think these again are quite versatile wines. Or am I damning fine wine by pairing with too simple a food? But I think simple pairings can work really well as well. So.
Well, I do remember going to Germany on a sommelier's trip, and we did meet a lovely German couple that were very excited to meet some English sommeliers, and they were showing us all their Trocken wines. And the wife very excitedly brought us out a big basket full of breads, and then a big bowl full of pork tartare, which we we weren't really sure if we were eating raw pork. It was very nice, but I think that would be great with something like that, slightly spiced raw pork. Yeah. But the other thing,
Excellent.
the interesting thing about all of these winemakers, because they are Generation Riesling, they are all below 35. So they are second, third, fourth generation winemakers from these estates. So it is Johannes and Christoph Schneider that have been making wine here since 2015. So not for very long. They've only been making the wines here, or only been in charge of the winemaking for 6 years. But I think that that's the general theme of this, being a younger generation that are taking over the mantle from an older generation. And, they're the future of, German wines, really. So what they're deciding to do, the varieties that they're planting and how they're doing them. Louisa says, how would this Pinot Noir compare to those from the Nahe region? I would say the Nahe were a bit heavier, were a bit riper, depending on which producer. I mean, from the Ahr Valley, definitely they're a little bit lighter than the Ahr Valley. The Ahr Valley can be very dense and concentrated, and the Nahe may be a bit more similar to this. And I think that
Amanda's question as well, actually. Lovely duos to taste together, she says, and you can see different style choices. She's asking if there's a tendency to oak more within the young generation, or is Max as an exception? I suppose that's quite interesting. What to your mind are the how do I put it, the sort of trends of the sort of younger generations, I should say, that are coming through?
I mean, I think people that have worked abroad are coming back with a myriad of different ideas and different influences, and they're applying that to what they're doing now in Germany, and some of it is going to work and some of it isn't. But if they've worked in New Zealand and they've worked in the Sonoma Coast, or worked or wherever in the Binal in Chile or Argentina, then they're going to bring back the things that they've learned, and they're going to try them out. And you only get one hit a year with this, so you only you put it in oak, and then you may over oak it, but it's a learning experience, I guess. So I think there'll be a lot of experimentation with the younger generation, which I guess is what we want to see. Rather than doing everything traditionally, I guess that's what you want to see with the younger generation. It's kind of pushing the boundaries, doing things that no one else has done, and some things are successful, maybe some things aren't, but that should make for interesting, diverse wines and wine styles.
Yeah, very much. It moves it on. Even if you come back closer to the centre where you were, you've definitely learned some things along the way. Even if you've learned what not to do, and what's rediscovered.
Exactly. I think great. Making mistakes is often as good as important as making successes. So that kind of brings us on to the final wine. So we thought we'd end up with something a bit sweet and something from a very classic producer. If you know Ernie Loosen, Ernie Loosen is not less than 35 years old, but I guess that they're in Generation Riesling really because of the winemaker who's making the wine there at the moment. I'm not sure who it is. I think it's a female winemaker that he's got doing specifically the sweet wines, but I think that she's the one that's got Ernie Loosen into the Generation Riesling category. So this is his the estate beer in Auslese. So as he's based, really his vineyards are in Urzig and in Erden up in the Mosel, but this is an estate beer in Auslese. So again, I'm not sure about the price of this. If someone's got the price, you could put it up. I would imagine it's not a bad, it's half bottle, 7% alcohol. Residual sugar on this would be interesting for people to try and guess. So £15.30. So it's a kind of a beer in Auslese at not a budget beer in Auslese, but if it was an Urzig Würzgarten beer in Auslese, it would be beer in Auslese. It would be much more expensive. So it's a bit more of his generic beer in Auslese. Acidity on it is 9.4 grams per liter. So acidity is big. 141. It's in the notes. Yeah. So maybe a bit higher than a Sauterne, but I think you can see that acid. You can see that acid on it, but you can see that ripeness on it as well, that sweetness. Again, not an overpowering wine at all, not an over-sweet wine, I don't think.
No, it has a fresh dances, doesn't it? It carries all of that sweetness and that sugar very, very lightly, while still impressing its character on you and having this sort of great, wonderful kind of length as well.
It's kind of like
Very
eating
good.
a passion fruit. When you eat a passion fruit and it has loads and loads of sweetness and loads of flavor, but then it has that incredible acid that you get from passion fruit that holds it all together. And I think that's another point about selling, German Riesling in a restaurant. I've always had a German Riesling, from things like a Dr. Tanisch or something like that in restaurant wine list by the glass wherever I've worked. And I found very early on that when people asked about it, as soon as you mentioned the S word, as soon as you mentioned sugar, people were like, "Oh no, I don't like sweet wines." But when you give it to them blind, they probably wouldn't even think it was a sweet wine. Maybe this wine's a bit much, but a traditional cabinet or a Spätlese, you give it to the majority of the restaurant going public, and you said, "What do you think of this wine?" They would say it was lovely. And then you say to them, "Do you think it's too sweet?" They would say no. And it's really because you get that richness on the attack, but then you get that big acid that comes and cleanses the palate afterwards. It's only when sommeliers use the S word that customers say, "Oh no, thank you."
So you think this again is a style of wine that these Auslesers that sit with sort of modern lifestyles and modern palates in terms of it has that apparent incredible sort of freshness and as I say, it sort of dances. It's light in its complexity. By light, I mean it tends for me, it just sort of tends to float and dance across the palate as opposed to and there's no unctuousness about it at all. I think in that sense it stays fresh. It's
and then that freshness again, makes a great aperitif style of wine. Something like Cabernet, served as an aperitif is great. And the good thing about the wines that have residual sugar is that they're lower in alcohol. So if they're kind of 8-9%, it means and I've always fitted in German wines like that into tasting menus, because if you're having multiple courses and multiple wines, if you put in a lower alcohol wine, it means people make it to the cheese course without passing out, which is always handy. But
I was going to say, Ronan, nonetheless, these are quite difficult. I mean, sweeter wines are just generally ever not just from Germany, but are they not ever more difficult to sell, basically, because people do seem to, for some reason, equate that last glass of wine they've had with the one that has been less good for their waistline or less good for their head. And I guess also it's an added expense, isn't it? People, I think, have become more linear in their drinking. Would this be the case that they might go for a white and a red? They don't mix it up with perhaps a pre-prandial, a post-prandial, etc., or is that?
Well, I mean, I think that's the perception. The reality is that if it's not there in residual sugar, it's there in alcohol, so the calories are still there. But this style of wine I think would go very well with different types of food, and especially the warmer types of food. The slightly the styles with more chili, with more that sort of hotter, spicier kinds of food. I think it would work really, really well with. Just that acid and that sugar really combats heat and chili very, very well.
Yeah, that's very, very good. Just want a quick mention that Ernie Lewson's going to be featured tomorrow. I mentioned, I think, at the very beginning, in my vineyard tours. We've got 4 very different winemakers featured, and they'll be ready for streaming from 10 o'clock tomorrow morning if you go on to harpers.co.uk. They've been all really good boys and girls. They're all about 2.5-3 minutes long max. So you really do go philosophy, vineyard, cellar, and I think by being concise, it's actually fantastic. You learn quite a lot very, very quickly. So do tune into those. So excellent. Okay, so what other comments do we have on this? Notice on time we've been pretty good. We've got through our wines. It's been a really, really fabulous flight of wines. I don't know if there are any further comments from the audience, from the tasters, in terms of the Generation Riesling wines we've tried. Is that representative, fair? Anything really stood out? That would be nice to hear. Any real faves? Brianne's asking, lovely. Ronan, what would you go for Tokai or German sweet wine? Tokai seems better value.
I think I would be going for German sweet wine, to be honest. I mean, I love Tokai. But I think German sweet wine, and it depends, better value or not. I don't necessarily agree with that. If Tokai can get quite expensive. Yeah, 4 was my favorite. So Natalie liked she liked Fred's she likes Max's Pinot Noir. That's good. That's good. Both Rieslings were my favorite, and the Schneider Spätburgunder. Yeah, and I think if you do have a little bit of the Riesling left, the number 3, and you go back to that, once it's kind of come up to room temperature and once it's had some air to it, it just does have a lovely, slightly toasted kind of characteristic to it as well. Yeah, I think that was my favorite. How about you, Andrew?
I go both Rieslings, very much like the Weiler Spätburgunder and the Weissburgunder as well. I thought was absolutely superb. I mean, it's a great selection of wines all round, but quite difficult to cherry pick. I think for me, at the end of the day, I think Riesling would be my default position, actually, just in terms of love of variety as well. So but also horses for courses, it depends on the situation.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to jump straight on.
Weissburgunder, great value. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, some nice comments coming in. Well, audience, Ronan, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add. It's been absolutely brilliant. I think we covered a lot of ground. It's a really great selection of wines.
No, thank you. Thanks, Wines of Germany.
Real treat today to taste. And I think just a little wrapping up from me. So thank you all, audience, and not least as well for the tasters out there. We'd love to be able to have a straight conversation with you, but thanks for your chat. It's really good in your comments, and it's just nice to see everyone interacting there. Thanks to Wines from Germany for including Harpers in these sessions as well. Obviously, thanks to you, Ronan, for sharing your knowledge and passion for Germany and its wines. And just one more plug. I mentioned the streaming of the In My Vineyard winemaker high-speed tours, winemaker videos, which will be available to stream for free for 10 tomorrow morning on Harper's landing page, harpers.co.uk. Also, if you look there are 3 ways into still time to register for the closing debate, the Big G closing debate tomorrow afternoon, which takes place at, I'm scrabbling around my notes, 3 o'clock, I think I'm correct in saying. And you'll find that the advertising banner at the top of harpers.co.uk will allow you to click through. There's also a news story which has a link in it, which is on the front page at the moment. And it's 3 p.m. Phew, thank you, Caroline of Wines for Germany. So it'd be nice to see some more of you. Well, we've got plenty signed up, but come along and join the party. We've got Eowyn of ABS. We've got Ruth Spivey, well-known wine consultant, Wine Car Boot. We've got Colin Thorne, buyer of Vagabond Wines, and Anna from Odd Bins, all on board. It promises to be a really insightful and fascinating discussion. We've had some great tasting today. We're going to look more about sort of engagement with Germany, the challenges and opportunities when it comes to expanding and working on your portfolio and selling those wines, what they offer, their USPs, etc., etc. There's so much to talk about, but it's an hour from 3, so fantastic. So that's it from me. Very good to see you, Ronan.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone for tuning in, and thanks for Wines of Germany to host. And just to say, this photograph was sent to me by Katerina Prom. This is where she walks her dog. That's not a bad view, is it? Nice place, Germany. All right, thank you so much, Andrew.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you all. Thanks a lot. Thanks for attending. Cheers.